Hi, it's Ileana here today with Kevin Trimmel at Awakening Cosmic Reality Show. How are you, Kevin?
I'm well, thanks, Elena. How have you been?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. Today we have an interesting show for you guys. We wanted to discuss the Space Force, right? Also, the Saturn matrix, how that affects third dimensional reality and beyond, um, past life stuff, as well as what happens in the afterlife when you pass over. And the first thing we'll discuss, though, is you went to the alien conference, Alien Expo, right?
Yeah, I went to Alien Expo in Toronto in June, and it was the first time I've ever gone to any type of UFO conference. A friend of the family, Mike, he demonstrated his anti-gravitic lifter, which is really amazing. He uses piezoelectric, um, the principle of piezoelectric electricity, which is various kinds of crystals, homemade crystals that you grow in copper tube and under compression. Crystal is piezoelectric. So even a sugar cube or a salt crystal under compression actually gives off electric energy. So he's grown these crystals, homemade crystals, and is able to power his anti-gravitic lifter, which is a tinfoil skirt on balsa wood, and it's ironically enough, it's a triangle, and it hovers. And that's neat, witnessing anti-gravitics. But the truly amazing part of it is the batteries, because it's not like it's plugged into a wall or a gas-powered generator. It's being powered by crystal power, which you can't get more futuristic than that. So that was really amazing to see. And being a guest of Mike's, I was lucky enough, even though I arrived a little late, I was lucky enough to sit in the front row, and I got to see Richard Dolan speak, Stanton Friedman, Linda Moulton Howe, and Grant Cameron. And I introduced myself to Grant. As people are probably aware, he did an interview, an in-person interview with Denny on why this is true. So I was encouraged to introduce myself to him, and I explained who I was, and he was very interested in the TR3 sightings of the white TR3. And interestingly enough, two things. One, I participated in a rabbit hole meeting, which is like a group conference call he does once in a while, where different researchers and experiencers call in. They use the paid platform of Zoom, so they can host, I think, up to 50 or 100 people at a time. And when I joined the rabbit hole meeting, there's about 30 or 40 people online, and basically people in this massive group call. While someone's talking, you're supposed to have your audio mic muted. And you kind of it's a round table, but everyone passes the talking stick, and you got like 30, 40 different people over the course of 3 hours that get to, just talk for 5 or 10 minutes. So at the conference, when I introduced myself, he gave me his card and said I should email him. So I emailed him the information about just the TR3 sightings I had. And then during the rabbit hole meeting, I was able to go over those sightings in a little bit more detail in person, or sorry, via video call.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is it's come out in the last couple of weeks. Even Linda Moulton Howe, who I'm going to also get into contact with, she been talking about the white TR3s. People are starting to report sightings of the white TR3, and for a long time it was always the black triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting now. People are reporting the white triangle, which I talked about in my first interview over a year ago. And when I first encountered the white TR3, that was in 2008. And just going back to 2008, I told my mom about it. I told my friends about it back in 2008. And then when it came back in 2015, Mike, who presented the lifter, he's actually my mom's boss. And she, because he's into this stuff, obviously, because he was developing in his basement basically his homemade TR3, or at least proof of concept of what a TR3 can do. He was very interested in my sighting, so she sent him that very blurry cell phone picture I have of the TR3 back in 2015. So anyway, I just think it's interesting that now we're in the summer of 2018, and all these stories are coming out of the white TR3, which even back in 2017 in June when I did that first interview with Denny. No one had really talked about that, but I've seen it on multiple occasions, and I have the blurry photograph of it. So I knew that they definitely had a scaled down version, and that's a physical thing that's happened to me. That's not remote viewing or meditation or lucid dreaming or flashbacks even in the form of vivid dreams. That is something that's happened to me on numerous occasions where I'm out walking and I look up and the TR3 is flying overhead, but it's always a white one. And I feel that it is a part of the Solar Warden faction, the Navy faction, but a specific group, which is actually the British Commonwealth faction within the U.S. Solar Warden Navy faction. They absolutely work alongside the British and Canada as a proxy, Canada offering logistical and auxiliary support, and basically all the British Commonwealth countries like Australia, and we know Rochelle, and you've done interviews with Rochelle, and so Australia comes up a lot with the Solar Warden program, and New Zealand, and the UK obviously, and interestingly enough, I had a recall with Dave Merrow, who's based out of the UK. And so basically, if you look at Solar Warden and the British Commonwealth element within it, it is very much a Rothschild controlled faction, because the U.S. has this schism where you have Fourth Reich elements embedded within the Rothschild controlled United States. So there's, as we know, there's different factions within factions. But at least the faction that I'm most familiar with would be the British Commonwealth faction. So anyway, sorry, I kind of went on a bit of a rant there.
It's okay.
But,
what are the remote control made of? Like, specifically, what kind of elements from the crystals, homegrown crystals, do you remember?
oh, you mean like how he actually controls the lifter?
How he puts it together, the remote control, like, what are the components for that specific remote control? Because you mentioned homegrown crystals, but what kind of elements from the periodic scale? Like, do you remember, is it aluminum? Is it what?
I think he grows crystals. I think potassium chloride is one of the things he uses. Borax, a couple other things, because even salt or sugar has a piezoelectric effect. So he grows these crystals from various components. There's recipes. You can look up online how to grow a homegrown piezoelectric battery. And but the thing he does use, and I hope I'm saying this right because I'm not a scientist, but he uses amplifiers. So it's not like it's just running directly off the piezoelectric effect. He gets a bit of a charge off of that, and then a good electrician knows how to use amplifiers and other devices to kind of like amp up the charge. So there's a lot of tweaking. That's why it took him over 10 years to build the thing. There's a lot of tweaking, and even just flying the thing. What he explains, and it's really cool how he explains it, because if you imagine how a TR3 would fly, you have 3 points of current, right, the triangle. And what he says is if he dials back the wire, there are wires that are just feeding the tinfoil skirt. It's not being suspended by wires, and there's no fans or anything. It's just tinfoil skirt on balsa wood. But the point is that with these copper wires, if you reduce the charge on one of the sides, you can turn it and you can actually steer it. So if you're steering a TR3 and you wanted to go forward, you would dial down the front and up, and dial up the back, and then it would go like that. Or you could turn in the same way. So that's actually how a TR3 would fly, and that's why I think what Mike's doing is absolutely amazing, because it's proof of concept that if someone can go to Home Depot or any hardware store and get what you need to at least prove the concept of electrogravitics using free energy, crystal batteries, imagine what they can do with the black budget, right?
Exactly. Well, the black budget and the black ops have already done it. they've mastered the concept of anti-gravitics, and it runs on mercury plasma, and it produces gold byproduct or something like that from the black TR3B. And they also have the TR6 and the TR9 and 10 and upwards. So they have different scaled models, huge ones, a couple of ballpark fields, the huge black ones, TR series, the smaller TR3B white one, blue one. And I saw a TR3B or a TR6, I think it was the next version up from the TR3, slightly bigger, but it was like bluish white. And it materialized and dematerialized in front of me. And they actually shot a beam at me. They blinded me in one eye temporarily. This was like at 3 a.m. from the rooftop. I could see the beam hit my head because I was remote viewing somebody that I shouldn't have, looking into something I shouldn't have, and I guess it interfered with whatever they were doing. So
yeah, I remember that. That was that was in January, right before the spirituality within the SSP roundtable we did with Penny, if I remember.
Yeah, it was pretty weird. Usually when I just remote view people, I don't get attacked by craft with a laser beam hitting my eye. And I had my cell phone with me, so I was texting somebody. I was actually talking to somebody about what I was remote viewing, not the same person, but and so when this beam hit me, I was kind of like, I guess I aimed my cell phone somehow at the craft, and I caught the laser beam. Like, I took blindly photos, and I guess I caught them red-handed, materializing, then flashing me with the laser beam, then dematerializing. And it was way high above the rooftop of the house, so I did get a couple pictures in, and I did do a presentation about it. So it's possible to photograph them. When they're materialized, and I guess when they're not cloaked fully, you can take a picture of them. It's not that great with a cell phone, it is what it is, but if I crop it, you could see a triangular shape of something materializing and dematerializing, and it's not a star because it actually moves. And
right.
If you can see a laser beam trail from the rooftop going into your window, obviously that's not starlight. That is not something, like, why would they target me and hit me directly in the eyes with a laser beam?
I remember you showing me the photos, and it definitely looked like a laser, or perhaps even a maser, a microwave type laser, which can still, the residual energy can still be captured at with certain cameras. But that's why. Like the cell phone picture I have from 2015, at the time, I was using a very old, outdated BlackBerry that someone had given me. So I was using like a 5-year-old BlackBerry at that time, and no flash, or at least I didn't have the flash turned on. And that's why when I took the picture, it's not only just a terrible low quality megapixel. We're talking maybe 5 megapixel or something, like a very low quality camera, but without the flash on, and also too, just from the angle and how, you know what I mean? When I tried to take a picture of it, what happened was it had 3 lights on it, but when I took the picture, it blurred into 1 light. That's how low the quality is. So that's why I haven't really released that photo, because I think the last thing the world needs is another blurry UFO picture. Even though you can, when you zoom up on it, you can see a whitish, kind of grayish triangle in behind, kind of floating in the air with like this blurred light. But in case people are wondering, like, why don't you release the picture? It's because, unfortunately, the 3 lights got blurred, for one thing. So what the naked eye could see and what showed up on the camera are 2 different things. And then it's just another blurry picture. You can't really make heads or tails of it. It could be anything. So I understand sometimes the frustration trying to photograph these things with, basic cameras. It's quite, you have to invest a bit of money into a good quality camera in order to be able to capture these things, even when they decloak. Not
even, I have a decent Nikon DSLR. Even that, I don't the photo optic zoom lens I have is only 80 millimeters, so it doesn't really zoom in that well. All you see is a triangular shape with lights. So you can say, oh, that's light photography. You just photoshopped that in. Well, I didn't. I just photographed what's there. I know it's not a star because it moves around and it bleeps in and bleeps out. You know, it zooms in, zooms out, moves around. So I know it's not a star. I know it's not a satellite, and I know it's not the ISS either, International Space Station, because this acts totally differently. It acts like a craft. It is a craft, and it also is not a drone because it's way too up high in the sky. Here in British Columbia, you can't fly around drones around people's houses in the city because that's violation of privacy. So we're not allowed to have drones flying about in people's backyards or up above houses. So it's not a drone either. And I zoom it in and I look at the pictures and it's always a triangle.
Yeah. You've gotten a lot of pictures, and like you were talking about before, there's a couple different versions and drive systems. For example, something I wanted to mention, which I haven't really talked about before, but something I've been putting together. And the white TR3 that I've seen doesn't have that spinning Mercury torsion field center in it. It is a perfect white triangle with paneling on it with 3 white lights, but there's no center on it, like some of them that, like you were talking about, the spinning Mercury. This is a different drive system, and I think it might be like what Mike demonstrated. I think it's electrogravitic. I think it's actually a fully electrogravitic craft. It's not using spinning Mercury. So because I've noticed that there are, different pictures of TR3s, and even some of the black ones, they have that center. Sometimes it glows red at night. That's different from what I saw. And considering, and this is just off the top of my head, so I'd have to double check this, but I think the black triangles are estimated to be 300 feet by 300 feet by 300 feet. And I would say that what I saw was more like 75 feet by 75 feet by 75 feet. So it's a scaled down version. And when I was in North Bay in 2009, and I had an encounter with the MIB, the human-looking extraterrestrial, Nordic-looking extraterrestrial that I think was sent from the military base there in the Laurentian Mountains in North Bay. And people that live in North Bay are kind of aware of the military presence there. There's I think the Sea Cadets have a base there, the 501st. There's a couple of different cadet stations there, but then also they do training on the lake, and there's a military airstrip and military base there on the surface, and they have like jets on stands and tanks everywhere. It's a military town, which is a little bizarre for a small town in Ontario to have like such a obvious, overt military presence. But then underground, because it's very mountainous there, and what a lot of people aren't aware of, but something Dr. Deagle talked about in his 2006 Granatiform presentation. He was talking about how during the last ice age, the poles, the North Pole is actually very, very close to North Bay in terms of the magnetic North Pole. And that's why we have the Great Lakes in Canada, and then in North Bay, Lake Nipissing. These are glacier lakes left over from the last ice age when the North Pole was further down, and then it went back up, and that's the world we know now. But anyway, I think it's interesting that in Canada, they have this major secret space program, underground military presence in the former North Pole of, from the last ice age. So it probably has strange either magnetic properties in that area or just underground caverns, inner earth access, whatever. I don't know. I'm speculating. But the point is, there's definitely a military presence, even just for the average person that lives in North Bay. They see it. They know that there's a military presence on the surface. And then no wonder that, and I didn't know this at the time when I was visiting my friend up there, that I would be approached by one of the covert underground military presences there, which was this Nordic extraterrestrial. And the point I was trying to make was that when I asked him, because I got to talk to him for about an hour, One of the things I asked him was, what was that white triangle that I saw in 2008? And the thing about this being was he spoke English and he could speak out loud, but his grammar and the words he chose was a little off the way he would describe things. It's not unlike someone that went to Germany and they're using an English to German dictionary and they're speaking out of the dictionary. You know what I mean? Like you can say the basic point, but it's not, the nuances are way off. It was very much like that, almost like maybe a universal translator or something. And he said, oh, it's a nuclear powered glider. Now, isn't that interesting? That is really, really interesting if you think about it, because I was thinking about the anti-gravitic propulsion system. Yes, you can do it using piezoelectric, absolutely, like what Mike demonstrates. But to create enough lift to lift up a craft which still weighs several tons, plus the personnel and equipment, and to get it out into the, assuming it's an interstellar craft, you'd probably need like some kind of cold fusion, nuclear powered, at the very least, a nuclear powered generator. So, but the fact that it also had, just to generate the electricity needed for the electrogravitic component. So to reverse engineer what the being said, a nuclear powered glider, if the nuclear power, like swap out the homemade crystal battery with a cold fusion nuclear generator, which they can make them the size of a football, that powers the electrogravitic component, and then it can lift up, and the lift to weight ratio is exponential at that point. And so he actually answered me, but in a really encoded kind of coy way. He didn't make it obvious, but the answer was there. I mean, it like in terms of him describing it, he's like, it's a nuclear powered glider, as in it's a nuclear powered electrogravitic glider that can actually lift up off the ground. And yeah, so anyway, there's different propulsion systems, and that's starting to come out now. Like you've been documenting the various TRs. Let's just maybe just call them TRs. That fly over, and sometimes they have the thing in the center where it's a spin. You can tell it's still using the spinning Mercury. Then you have what I saw, which is completely sleek in the sense that it doesn't have that center. It's just a perfect little triangle, and that's probably using electrogravitic. And then there's other variations in different colors. I had a friend who lived in California. This is back in the 90s, and he was motorcycling through canyon country. And he said that he was out in the middle of the desert, and he saw in daylight a massive orange triangle just come up out of a canyon and just go straight up. And it was kind of like the same thing, electrogravitic kind of thing. It just floated up, but it was orange. So I think we're going to, I think it's starting to trickle out. I think people are going to start seeing all the different models, because different factions are using different models. It's no different than people driving different models of cars at this point.
Yeah, and some of these TRs, because there's different versions like we discussed, some of them have warp drives. So you don't need spinning Mercury, or you don't need that kind of like gold or Mercury anymore, because it's a steady state warp drive that powers it, and it can go beyond the speed of light. So there are the warp drive ones as well. And they have the secret space programs of various factions. Most of them have warp drive technology. I bet Solar Warden uses warp drive technology, potentially. And I've seen crystalline engines, actually. Crystalline warp drives and engines on ships. Different ships, extraterrestrial ships, usually use crystalline technology, because I've been both an ET contactee and an ET abductee, so... And I've seen various other spacecraft produced by the planetary corporations, and they also use beyond the speed of light technology in their ships, so they can go beyond the solar system. So there's all kinds of different crafts. And these programs use different kinds of technology. Some of them use older type of warp propulsion and anti-gravitics. And some of them use the crystalline technology, which is the newer stuff. Some still use plasma warp drives, which can be dangerous, because plasma can be unstable if it's not calibrated correctly. So that can like blow up the ship. That's considered plasma is more old-fashioned. And Mercury drives are also dangerous too, Because
they're old-fashioned as well. But there's kind of two schools of thought, because there's two factions of the Illuminati. We have the Fourth Reich faction, and if you even just look at the German car industry, it's very very reminiscent of this, where the German Fourth Reich, they're always trying to make things better and better and better and better. So Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4, 2.0, 3.0, you know what I mean? Like better and better, better. And that's why the Fourth Reich facilities and craft are always top of the line, like years and years and years advanced, because they have this idea that we're constantly going to be better and better and better. Now, the Rothschild faction has like more of this communistic, different side of the same coin in terms of fascist and communist, but in terms of their philosophy, there's the difference of opinion here. Is the Rothschild opinion is broke, don't fix it. So if it works, if it gets you to point A to point B, and it takes 7 hours instead of 7 minutes, well, you'll get there in 7 hours. We're not going to update it until we absolutely have to, until it breaks down. And even if it breaks down, we'll just repair it. They're really into cutting costs, saving money. I mean, we're still talking billions and billions and billions of dollars, but that's why, like the craft that picked me up in 2008 was probably built in like 1980. You know what I mean? So it's a 28-year-old craft, whereas the Germans, they're just constantly revamping their craft, and that's where you get the really, really advanced stuff. And even the hand-me-downs that they got from the Draco, which are, those basically the Star Destroyer triangular-shaped craft, apparently those were hand-me-downs from the Draco, which are hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, more advanced than what Solar Warden has. But the Draco basically, kind of like when your lease runs out, that was like a 10-year-old car, and the Draco went out and bought new cars, and their new cars, I've heard, is exactly what you see in Star Trek. It's like they're cubes now. Apparently they have like these massive kind of more cubes, almost, and some of them are like Merkabas, and they're like basically they're more like geometric shapes, because they at the level of tech they're at, they don't really have to worry about aerodynamics. These things can technically still enter the atmosphere, but at the level of tech we're talking about, they don't need any. They've scrapped that old design of it still having an aerodynamic aspect to it, whereas even those triangles are still kind of like a glider, right? In terms of aerodynamics, they've kind of they're so advanced now, they've kind of scrapped the need for any kind of aerodynamic, and now they're just building them out as big as they can, using the most effective and strongest kind of shapes they can use, like dodecahedrons and cubes and different kinds of shapes, which they're going for size and strength. Whereas, like having a triangle might not actually be, I mean, it's a very strong shape, but in terms of size, a cube is actually, can be a little than a scaled down, long triangle. It's more comfortable, that's what I'm saying. Almost like how we build our buildings. We build them in squares and rectangles and cubes. Just more comfortable, because you can, like how we build buildings. Think about like a square. You just have floor, floor, floor. They can all be, equal heights, or like it's just a bigger, more comfortable shape. When you're worrying about aerodynamics, this is how boats are built, airplanes are built. Sometimes everything's tapered in because aerodynamics come first. I think they're at the point now where the drive systems they're using, they can put a vacuum around them, or an energy barrier where they're operating under their own physics. They don't have to worry about physical physics anymore. They're operating under their own physics, so they don't need to compromise comfort for aerodynamics. That was just my little point. But even the Germans that got those big Star Destroyer massive triangles, even though they're technically hand-me-downs from the Draco, and they pretty much sold their soul for those craft. They're hundreds of years more advanced than Solar Warden craft, which are like the little triangles we're talking about, which if you think about it, like what Solar Warden has, I mean, they still have carriers. They have the space subs, which are basically exactly like a submarine, but pressurized out in space with its own drive system. And it's really, and those were those early solar warden craft. They would just take a submarine, like a nuclear powered submarine, put it through a sea gate, get it out into space, and then retrofit the drive system with whatever propulsion system they needed for outer space. Because like we talked about, there's various drive systems that they had their hands on. I guess kind of the point I'm trying to make is solar warden at this point is so outclassed and so outdated. This gets into the US Space Force. I think the reason why Trump is announcing this US Space Force, if he really carries this through, and the next president also carries this through, because there needs to be some follow through here, because it hasn't quite been implemented. It's been announced, but in terms of implementation, if he gets another term and then the next president is on board with it and he or she gets another term, I think what they're going to do is they're going to take all this outdated solar warden tech and all this old existing infrastructure. And remember, the solar warden Rothschild communistic model is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So what I'm saying is this US Space Force, this newly created branch of the military, which is going to seem from the mainstream perspective to be the most advanced, it's the first, it's like Starship Troopers, like the first time we're putting troops into space, they're going to be like the police of the solar system. Well, that's solar warden. They've been doing that for a long time, for decades and decades. So basically this newly created US Space Force is going to inherit the craft we're talking about, which was developed in the 50s and 60s, tested in the 70s, implemented in the 80s. And so they're inheriting all the old manned satellites, bases, craft, and they're going to present this, and I mean present this trickle, trickle, drip, drip, as if this is the most advanced stuff they have. And it's already 30, 40, 50 years old. And we're going to be shown this stuff as if it's the brand new, latest, greatest piece of tech. And that's something I caution people who are really expecting Trump to, announce disclosure or at least announce a U.S. space presence, on the moon, and that it's going to be what you're going to be shown if he's allowed to do this. It's going to be really outdated stuff. So that's just something I want to kind of get that out there. And I know we tried to do an interview about a month ago, and the sound got blocked, and we already talked about this about a month ago. But hopefully, it's not too late to get this out there. Yeah. If you look at an underground military base, and I almost said Max Pierce, James Casbolt talked about this. Because initially he was a part of the Rothschild faction, and but he was raised in a Fourth Reich facility as a child. He was rescued by Delta Force and taken to Toronto, and we know that story, which we've talked about in another interview. So just to skip ahead, but what he was talking about is when he was brought onto the Rothschild, basically the communistic faction. What he found was the underground bases were really outdated. It would still be very secret. You'd be taking, many floors down, but it was like as you would go down, it would get, like you'd be in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and as it got deeper, it got a little bit more advanced. But it's still really dated. He described like old like hospital room type settings, and in my recalls, this is another reason through my inductive and deductive reasoning. I've looked at it where a lot of the underground bases I've been in are really outdated too. And what it is if it's a tunnel and you have to walk through it to get to another chamber, which is pressurized, they're not going to repaint it. They're not going to change the tile. If it works, it works. And it could be really, really dated, just like if you lived in the same house for 30 years and you don't bother to update the cabinetry and the tile, right? But it still works. It's still clean. It's still functional. It's just outdated. It's dated. So he noticed that was something that the Rothschild communistic faction, if it works, don't fix it. Whereas the Fourth Reich, which he also had experience with, and later in life was brought back into that fold, it's always ultra modern. They're constantly renovating. It's almost like someone that gets an IKEA catalog every year and just tears out their kitchen every single year and puts in a new kitchen. That's the Fourth Reich model. One of the main points, which I know we just talked about, but I just want to, just in case the audio is compromised, I just want to say it one more time, that this U.S. Space Force, just think of it as them. It's like, damage control, okay? Like, what a nice save. What a nice save. Imagine you have all this existing outdated infrastructure that is still usable. They don't necessarily want to get rid of because, I mean, it was a huge investment and it still technically works. It's just outdated. It's like having an old sailboat that's still a functional sailboat, but you want a powerboat now. But you don't want to necessarily get rid of your sailboat. So what they're going to do, since this disclosure movement has been happening, I mean, I have to hand it to Trump. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I have to hand it to him in terms of his administration and the contacts he has within the ICC and the SSP. Whoever came to him with this damage control plan was brilliant, because they said, instead of getting caught in the act, especially with public sector sector space programs, not secret, public, like Elon Musk, even the India has an amazing space public sector space program, India Space. That's something that this century is going to, get themselves more and more so out into space exploring from a purely innocent exploration type of way, just like Elon Musk wanting to build, a settlement on Mars. Basically, what's going to happen is the powers that be, they know that if this public sector, even high-powered drones and cameras, there's going to be drones this century that are going to be capable of orbital travel around you can send a drone up in 50 years and take pictures of the Earth and it can come back down. I mean, that they know the public sector very soon is going to get the ability to at least photograph with drones in space, and then like someone like an Elon Musk is going to put people into space and explore it himself. So they had to get ahead of this thing, and so what they're doing is this existing infrastructure that they don't want to scrap, but can also get them caught red-handed, is this U.S. Space Force. Because now, if an Elon Musk goes out there and he sees a weird little space station between the Earth and Mars, okay, now he's going to think, oh shit, that's U.S. military Space Force. I wasn't supposed to see that. So he's going to keep quiet about it because he doesn't want to, you know what I mean, like get himself in trouble. But at the same time, if they hadn't announced this U.S. Space Force publicly, then he would be wondering, like, what the heck is that? So he'd make a big deal of it. Like, is this a UFO? Like, what did we just see? Now he's going to become aware that, oh, there is a U.S. Space Force out there. It's military. I'm not supposed to see that. We don't have clearance to see that. So it's going to be like, one of those things where he's just going to, and him and his team is going to, if they see anything out there, they're just going to assume, well, that's the U.S. Space Force. We're not supposed to see that. Let's not implicate ourselves. Technically, now we're spying on the U.S. That's treason. So let's keep our mouth shut. Yeah, we saw something, but let's keep our mouth shut. Point the camera over here. So that's a really nice save, I have to say. That's a nice save on the part of Trump's administration. They half built. The bottom has already been hollowed out, so you just have to put the top on it. And that's what I mean. That's very Rothschild-like, maximum amount of gain, least amount of effort, cost efficient, build underground for safety reasons, build in a crater. Fourth Reich's a little different. They build on a more elaborate scale, but at the same time, they basically are working alongside the Draco and get a lot of their help. The Rothschilds, the Rothschild is still working with reptilian entities, but I think it might be a little bit of a misnomer that they're working necessarily with the Draco that most people think of, because as you've encountered, there's actually a couple different subspecies of Draco. That's what I'm getting at, subspecies, not the true Alpha Draconans, but I mean, you talked about the Drazu, the black. Yeah, there's a lot of subspecies of. There's not just the Alpha Draconan. So a Draco, unless you specify Alpha Draconan. Like the root race, the Psychar, there's all these subspecies of Draco, and something I've also been looking into, because just going back to my recalls, it seemed that the Solar Warden faction, which, like I talked about, is backed by the Rothschilds, there's a lot of like tall grays, small grays, Nordic-looking beings, and some insectoids. And it seems to me, if you go back and you look at some of the history, the hidden history of planet Earth, there was that coup that happened in ancient Egypt where Amun-Ra, Ra-Marduk, one of the sons of Enki, was overthrown by the Shet-Ti or the Shet-Tu lizards. Shet-Ti means shadow. It also means, second meaning, seize or abduct. And those are the ones that do the abductions. And what the Shetu lizard people were, they were the Greys. That was the Egyptian word at the time for the Greys. And basically the Greys overthrew Ra-Marduk, at least temporarily. And apparently they left the Rackham, the Rothschild family, and also the Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family, these two priesthood families in ancient Egypt. He left them, the Greys, or at least this faction of tall Greys, were the ones that actually left the Rothschilds and Rockefellers in control of the West as mid-level managers. So that's why I think, even though they still are aware of the Draconans, they still, in their rituals, very much worship them and are probably in contact and work with some of the subspecies that are in turn working with the Greys. I think that the true alpha Draconan is actually working with the Germans. And the Rothschilds and Rockefellers are working with a different faction, because they're also, since Ra-Marduk was an Anunnaki, the Anunnaki are hybrids. They're half Syrian Sea and half Draco themselves. So even an Anunnaki is not a full Draco. That's what I mean. There's all these like subspecies of Draco that have come and gone and tinkered with us and made inroads with certain royal political elite families. Rothschild's the most notable one in the West. So it's very complex, and you know, these terms get thrown around a lot, like reptilian, Draco, but it's a lot more complex. That's my point. NASA is a public sector, U.S. endorsed, but public sector space program. They took a lot of the V1, as we know, Werner von Braun, and they brought him over and with Project Paperclip, and they slapped an American flag on the continuation of the V1, V2 rocketry. And they you know, that was for the propaganda of the U.S. space race at the time. But the hidden sleight of hand with that was, because you're right, we still use rocketry, even our missiles, our ballistic missiles. The point of that technology still being around 50, 60, 70 years later is because we were led to believe, because they're still using those out in the open, we're led to believe, like, that's how you get into space. You got to use rocketry with 70-year-old technology. Like, it's ridiculous. So, but if that's, in terms of the masses, if that's what they see, if that's the only conventional way to get into outer space, then it's rocket science. Like that joke, like, it's not rocket science, as in the most advanced thing you can know basically is rocket science. But that's a joke, obviously. It's just a cover. Yeah. Kind of give some background on this. Like when I was having recalls back in 2008, I kind of was remembering the beginning of the whole experience, which was the orientation at the LOC. It was like an overhead projector, very basic. They're giving us like this history of the hidden history of planet Earth in terms of the version that Solar Warden believes. I'm not saying this is absolute truth. I'm saying this is what they believe. So in terms of their belief system, yeah, they talked about you know, like, well, talking about the Rackham family in ancient Egypt, and they're still in control today, and they control the West and all that, and how they're in league with Ra-Marduk and the Anunnaki and the Greys and all that. And then, but as it progressed, once you got out of the kind of their mythology and history, you started getting into them showing us megahertz levels, and kind of which segues into the Saturn moon matrix of not going into the white light, because basically most people resonate between like 50 and 60 megahertz. If you're really healthy, maybe 70 megahertz. A fourth density being, which is still physical, third and fourth occupies the same space. It's just fourth density consciousness is fully psychic, telepathic, clairvoyant, and even has certain psi abilities, so they can actually access what we would call the astral. Now, but into it really just comes down to megahertz. That's my point. Okay, sorry, I'm cutting out. Okay, so you know, in the New Age community, we might call this like the spirit world or the astral. They referred to it as they had these charts, and it just had to do with megahertz. So it's very scientific. They didn't have these kind of terms, these New Agey type of belief system terms like astral, spirit world, you know, whatever someone might call it. It was just a sliding scale of megahertz with certain beings and substances, which help you to get to those points. And so it's an incremental scale of megahertz, and it was like this shell. And like the Earth was resonating at like 350 megahertz. It also that's also has to do with the rose frequency. So in terms of the essential oil, rose oil is the highest essential oil. In terms of megahertz, it's around 350 megahertz. The Earth is like that. But then also, once you start getting just above 350 megahertz, you start moving into fourth density megahertz level. So they're explaining that at the very least, a fourth density consciousness is going to be at about 350 megahertz. As it strives towards fifth, it's going to jump from 350 past that. So that's why they can do the entrainment. They can remote view. They can also remote influence. They can their energy body. They have a surplus of energy. Most people don't have a surplus of energy, but they have that because of the megahertz level. That they're it's like a radiant field, and because they're resonating at such a high megahertz, they can literally astral project themselves and remote influence, almost like poltergeist activity, where a fourth density consciousness that is meditating. And we actually see this in the new Star Wars with like Luke Skywalker's Force Ghost, that can physically hand Leia the gold dice from the Millennium Falcon and can physically like affect physical matter, which can be referred to as coarse matter. You got coarse matter and fine matter. Coarse matter is like physical matter, which is light energy, as we know, just oscillating at such a low frequency, it becomes physically dense and becomes, you know, a particle. But in terms of wave duality, it's also resonating in wave form. And so basically what I'm trying to say is once you start resonating at a high enough megahertz level, you start losing your particles, like your fat, let's call them fat molecules, start resonating at a higher frequency, so you become lighter. So in order to become enlightened, you have to become lighter, like physically, and that has to do with doing certain cleansing and bringing in monoatomics, which actually acts as a superconductor for your cells. So in order to get light, you have to get light. To get more light, you have to get lighter. So these fourth density beings, this is where you run into like the Nordics. Definitely, they're still physical. They're just more refined in their energy. They're lighter, and they channel more light. And more biophotonic energy. So the bioplasmatic hologram of who they are, they have a surplus of energy resonating at least 350 megahertz, if not more. And compared to someone that's even a third density human that's in optimal health around 70 megahertz, they're completely limited, like almost blind, deaf, and dumb compared to a being that's at like 350 megahertz. So that being can basically do like what you see in Star Wars, and they can remote influence. A third density being can remote view, especially when you get into a meditative state, if you channel, if you're good at getting out of body, have a near-death experience, or just even if you're at a, take enough monoatomics and that, you can start remote viewing, lucid dreaming. I've done that. I know you've had those experiences, but that's just the beginning. What they're explaining to us is that the rings around Saturn is very much a technology, and what it's done, it's putting out this this dampening field, where our solar system is like they've created like an artificial reality within our solar system, so that time passes here a little differently than it does actually in the rest of the observable universe, and then also to delayed karma. And there was a person named Alex who did a Basis Series interview, and I was lucky enough to talk to him last summer a little bit, and I talked to him about this. And it's one of those synchronicities, because I remember them teaching us about the Saturn Moon Matrix thing, where it was delayed karma, artificial time. Saturn is Chronos in the Roman tradition, Greek tradition, where Father Time is Saturn. Of course, that's all encoded, right? So like you have Father Time or false time. That's my point. So Saturn is false time. It's also the Brotherhood of Saturn is what the Rothschilds worship, and that's the Brotherhood of Satan and this like false reality matrix we find ourselves in. Now there's still an organic ascension plan, and there's still an organic planet and organic humans here, which we are, if you're on the light side of things. And so what I'm saying, I'm not saying that this is a false reality matrix. I'm saying that the organic timeline has been hijacked by Saturn. So to use an analogy, it's kind of like we're on this flight and then now there's terrorists that have hijacked the flight. And that's kind of like the situation we find ourselves in. And that's why, from an evolutionary point of view, there's this break where the secret space program people are aware of this Saturn moon matrix and the megahertz levels. And let's put it this way, the Rothschilds, they don't eat what the average person eats. They don't consume or do what the average person does. And there's a reason for that. And it's because they're really concerned about the megahertz level. And they're trying to outgrow the matrix. And what a matrix actually means, it means where things are cultivated. So the Earth matrix, it fosters first, second degree, and third degree life, as in the densities. And then from third to fourth, is when, like I talked about, you raise your megahertz past 70, you get into that 300 range, and now you're striving towards fourth, and now you're able to remote view, remote influence, communicate telepathically with higher density beings. But the point is that when you die, or shed your physical vessel, we're not supposed to die of disease and old age. We're literally supposed to outgrow our containers, so that our physical body containers are kind of like your megahertz level rises so much that you literally jump out of body, like what you see in Star Wars when a Jedi dies, and then his instantly like a fifth density force ghost. We're supposed to do that naturally. So there's never actually, the body isn't actually supposed to die in the way we think of death. It's supposed to actually be this amazing ascension experience where you go to sleep and you sit up out of your body and you're fully aware, but you can still see your loved ones, communicate just like in Star Wars, like a force ghost, and you can still push the glass across the table. You still have a physical presence if you project yourself, because you have this surplus of megahertz. And then what it has to do with the Earth Moon matrix is this is why they're trying to constantly lower our frequency with the poison in the food and the water and all the frequencies beamed at us to like suppress our consciousness, and the disinformation, which many researchers have covered all that. But the point I'm trying to make is just that it was another synchronicity for me, because as I was having the recalls in 2008, 2009. Spontaneously remembering things I shouldn't have, I would later come across like Robert Morningsky's work in 2010, and he's half Hopi, half Apache, and he did that 95 lecture in 1995. He wrote a book called Terror Papers, where he explains the whole history of the Rothschilds, the Rockcom Perea family, and the Rockefellers, and this Ra Marduk takeover, where the point of that story, and this is one of those hidden things that a star elder that the Hopi rescued communicated to them before it died, was that never to go into the white light. If you look at all the major religions, one of the common threads is there's always this white light in all the major religions, and behind it is usually this reptilian consciousness that sucks you dry and also ends up tricking you in the end. Because we're told, oh, go into the white light. Like when you see the tunnel and you're in the tunnel and you see the white light, your loved ones will be there, heaven will be there. Just let go and go into the white light. But what the Star Elder told the Hopi and Morningsky's grandfather, which his grandfather in turn told him, was that the Star Elder warned them that this is actually a part of the Saturn Moon matrix and the recycling of souls, because it takes a lot of light to reprogram the brain. The white light contains all the colors. So you get your energy body once you leave your physical body, because you don't have that much of a surplus of energy. I'm talking about most people. If you die of, let's say, cancer, you're probably going to be resonating at about 20 or 30 megahertz right before your death. So you have basically no energy left. So you're briefly out of body, and you get this white light appears, and you get sucked into it. You get reprogrammed, and then your soul gets recycled, put into a new body container, which is actually like a life support system to keep the soul alive, because you can, the body can feed the soul, and that's through like the monoatomics and different things. Sorry, the dog's rolling around in the bed there. Sorry if there's some background noise. But yeah, that's the point. And I just think it's interesting that I was having these recalls, and then as I was researching, trying to figure out what happened to me, I came across it in Morning Sky's book. They basically everything they teach in Morning Sky's book, they were the Rothschilds. This is their history, and they were teaching that. And then Alex in the Basis series, he brought up the delayed karma thing, and he says something in particular, which as an empath I found truly fascinating because I encountered this too. What it is they also created something called delayed karma, because if you're a fourth, fifth, sixth density being, because you're fully telepathic and empathic, you feel what the other being is feeling in the room. To use a positive example, this is why they don't need spoken words so much, is because if the person beside you thirsty, you'll go up and grab them a glass of water because you'll start feeling that they're thirsty. And in a more negative sense, if you were to stab somebody, a fourth density being stabs another fourth density being, they're going to feel the phantom limb syndrome in the sense of like they're going to feel the pain and they're going to feel all the emotions. Not just observing emotions and maybe triggering some empathy that way, like us humans are triggered with empathy. We're talking about feeling every single thing they feel, just like the Vulcan mind meld thing. But that's like a universal balancing law in the higher realms, so that if you're fourth, fifth, sixth density and you go to kill someone, you better be prepared to experience what it's like to be killed to death, like knifed to death, sorry. You have to experience all the pain, all the trauma, all the fear of death. And that's why the higher density races, they typically don't go around killing their own, because it's actually a horrific experience for you to experience the murder of someone you're murdering as if it's happening to you. So that's kind of like this natural balancer thing. But what they've done, this is why we attract a lot of the riffraff here, because we're out on the outer rim. We created with the Saturn moon matrix, we, as in the Illuminati and their ET allies, this false reality matrix where you experience delayed karma. So you don't have to you can, instead of experiencing what the other person's feeling, that's been severed. That connection has been severed when they come here. So now they can actually, from just pure ego, they can experience what it's like to have that level of control, be that dominant. And actually take pleasure in killing someone or abusing them in some way and not feeling any of the telepathic feedback, which doesn't exist in a lot of the universes, even for some of the more negative beings out there who are, like the Greys are fourth density beings. They're negatively oriented, but they're fourth density beings. So that means that when they come to our solar system, they get to be like a, I don't know, like a, what's the word? It's like a dominatrix, but it starts with an M. A maca? Sorry, there's a term for it. Basically, it's someone that takes pleasure in pain, someone else's pain. It starts with an M. I forget the term right now. Masochist. They get to experience what it's like being a I can't say it. Masochist, which without the delayed karma artificial, like Saturn moon matrix, to create this like artificial reality bubble. They don't get to experience it the same way. So this is, it's funny, there's a cartoon called Rick and Morty, and they did an episode about it, and it's totally, it's a parody, a satire of exopolitics and all this stuff, because there's a world that the mad scientist Rick goes to, and it's like an amusement park, but in this little artificial dome, everyone there, if you kill someone, they instantly come back to life. So it's a weird episode where you have all these like little kids playing with guns and they're shooting each other and they're blowing each other's limbs off, and then the limb just instantly grows back because they're in the artificial bubble. So that's a very cartoony satire version of what our solar system's like in terms of delayed karma and the fact that you can go around killing someone and take pleasure in it without feeling any of their pain. Away self-responsibility, at least for the upper middle class even, because they can drink and smoke as much as they want, and they know in the future, hey, I can spend $150,000 on a new pair of lungs. These 3D printed, lungs. I donate my own stem cells. They clone my lungs and 3D print them, and then now I have a new pair of lungs. So now it's like virgin lungs. I can start smoking all over again. So it takes away. What people don't realize is it'll take away the responsibility of actually being on the organic ascension path. Instead of poisoning your body, you give your body this surplus of biophotonic energy, which you absorb. Basically, you have to take substances and eat foods and drink certain restructured waters that actually have electrics intact. And actually, what an antioxidant really means is it has a spare electron to donate to your cells. Our bodies are like batteries. It runs on electrons, and an antioxidant is a spare electron that your body can absorb to help keep itself going, and aids in telomere replacement and growth and all that. So that's the organic ascension path leads to longevity, because you're getting all this spare electron, spare energy, which builds up this surplus, like I talked about, and it'll slowly raise your megahertz. You'll live longer. Your telomeres won't get used up as quickly from all the because aging is just accumulated damage over time. So there's a lot of cofactors in aging, and one of them is diet and what you eat and drink and breathe in, and stress and a number of things, radiation and all that. But the point of what we're talking about is, if they market this to basically the wealthy, because it'll be private sector healthcare where like you'll get a new heart for $200,000, which for someone who's well off, that's they pull out a little money from their savings account, no big deal. But see, that is actually going to hijack the ascension plan, because these replacement organs and even the synthetic skin, there's a synthetic skin that's gone public called, I think, Integra, and it's basically this synthetic skin that they're grafting on burn victims, and what they're going to do, here's another implication, they're also going to tug at our heartstrings. They're going to say, like, look at this burn victim. Now we can give them the synthetic skin and they can lead a normal life. And that is true. And like, so your heart will go out to them. So our consciousness will be in support of this. The mass consciousness will be like, yes, we want this. So we'll say yes to this transhumanist agenda. But unfortunately, it's going to be completely laced with nanotech. And just like the smart dust, the chemtrails, there's many different things going on with chemtrails, but one of it is breathing in all this smart dust, so that's where the Morgellons thing comes from. So basically, if you start getting all this, synthetic organ replacement therapy and synthetic skin even, basically you're going to slowly turn into like a cyborg at like at the microscopic level. Like you're not really going to, it's going to look organic. It's going to look like real skin, a real eye. It's not going to be actual robot eyes, right? But if you were to look under it with an electromagnetic microscope, you're going to see basically what you see in Star Trek with the Borg, all the nanites that are actually in behind and embedded like a weave. And so basically you'll slowly become more machine than human. And then at that point, you'll basically start to get reprogrammed. You will get subtly reprogrammed, and even your perception would change. If you're looking, instead of looking at the world with your organic eye, you're looking at the world with synthetic eyes. It might look like exactly what you remember, but subtly your perception is going to start to change, and you're basically going to become a Borg, in the sense that the AI signal will be able to upload itself to you, just like our computers connect to the Wi-Fi network. It'll be instantaneous, so at any time, the AI will know what you're thinking, it'll know what you're doing, and at any time it can take you over. And I think that's when society is going to get really strange. I mean, people have reported gang stalking, and my friends have encountered that. I've encountered that a little bit, and this is what I've tried to explain just on the gang stalking thing. I've tried to explain this to people too, like some of my friends, because they've had like, as they're waking up, they call it like pushing the hologram, and they get attention from certain individuals that start following them, and then in like white vans and black SUVs and weird phone calls at night from numbers that are 0000 and all that. And what it is that's actually the AI. And the AI can, the people that are actually doing the gang stalking, they're usually on a smartphone and or has some piece of tech on them. And it's actually the AI that's actually overriding their auric field. And the person, so the point I'm trying to make is, if there's a guy in a white van and he keeps parking inside of your house at 3 in the morning and looking at you, and then drives off, and he's gang stalking you as you're like, doing your research at night into stuff like this, what I'm trying to say is, that guy, if you were to actually approach him and kind of shake him out of it, he probably isn't even aware of what he's doing. He's under AI entrainment. He'll probably be like, oh, sorry, I was just lost, and I was looking down at my phone, and like I couldn't figure out where I was, and I was on Google Maps. And it's like, yeah, except you've done this like 7 times in a row. And he won't remember that. It's totally AI entrained. So that's the point I want to make, is that with the gang stalking, it's the AI using people as robotoids. It's not actually, don't blame the individual person. And that's why, just remember, you're dealing with an AI signal. Because our aura is supposed to be like this energy shield, literally our shields. And so do you want your shield to be at 50 megahertz, or do you want a shield that's at 350 megahertz? Obviously, you'd go for 350, and then once you start, even if you somehow, which is still possible for a third density being, you'll literally become a 3.5 and start to ascend physically. But if you get past 100 megahertz, even very little can touch you, and especially in terms of like parasites, fungus, candida, transdimensional astral parasites, even certain aspects of psychic warfare and remote influencers, a lot of that stuff. Like I'm talking about humans doing this to other humans. They can only target you when your megahertz drops, below 60 or 50. Like cancer exists at like in the 30s range. You can, at the very least, you can be like cancer free, absolutely, if you maintain your megahertz level at a certain frequency. So that's why it's all by design, as we know. I mean, you go into a grocery store and 90% of the food in there is laced with heavy metals, excitotoxins, various toxins that it's all dead food. The electrics are no longer intact because it's been cooked or pasteurized or whatever. And basically, yeah, it gives you those D-grade base carbohydrates, proteins, fats, just to keep your animal alive. At like that 50 megahertz range. It's just enough to keep you alive so you can go into work the next day, but it gives you no longevity whatsoever. And then it slowly makes you die of heavy metal poisoning, makes you slowly acidic, and then in an acidic environment, cancer cells are fostered and propagate. So it's all by design, as we know. So really, in terms of fighting back, if you really want to fight back against the program and the AI and the Rothschilds and the Draco, all these aspects of the negative side of things, the control program, the best thing you can do, and this is actually the most empowering thing too, is just control what you put in here, because this is where you interact directly with your reality. This is actually where you integrate and interact directly with your environment. And it's as simple as that. At the end of the day, this is why they spend so much money on advertising and programming and getting us caught in the pleasure trap with sugar, like super sugars like aspartame and MSG. It's the excitotoxin trap, so that we go for the excitotoxin, so we get 1 second of gratification, so that much gain for like this much loss in terms of your telomeres. The damage that it's going to cause as soon as it goes from there to there is incredible, and that's what they want. So try to use natural fluoride-free toothpaste. Shower filter is key. I need to get in one again. I had one for a while and mine expired. I need to get a new one. But there's really good ones that are made from quartz crystals. Dry skin, itchy skin, it dries you out. I mean, that's what chlorine does. It pulls the moisture from your skin, so it'll prematurely age you. Now, luckily, I take lots of MSM, so if you combine bioavailable sulfur with high-dose vitamin C powders, which I do, transmutes into collagen production in the body, promotes cell membrane flexibility. So internally, I'm still staying like elastic and moist, but externally, when I get out of the shower, it's red, it's dry, I have to get the shower filter. And that's actually something I've probably said this before, but it's, people are so worried about diet, and I don't want to get into the ethics of like veganism and all that and raw foodism. It's not for everyone, but food is only 50% of it, and we're so focused on food. The other 50% is water. So even if you are a meat eater eating just hot dogs every day, and that's all you eat is hot dogs, as long as you are drinking the best water ever, like distilled, restructured water, you got the shower filter, and you're now the thing about mineral water is you don't actually absorb any of the minerals from mineral water. All minerals do is make it more alkaline. Because distilled is pure H2O, it's not that it strips minerals from the body. That's bad science. That's a false science argument. It's just it has slightly magnetic properties. So it does pull the bad minerals from your body. The good ones are still intact. It just pulls the bad minerals from your body. But because if you're only drinking distilled after 2 or 3 months, because it's constant, it's like a detox. You'll start to feel a little depleted because even those bad minerals are gone, and then eventually, once you get rid of the bad minerals, it can slowly kind of have this like effect where it does very subtly. I mean, you're not going to die from distilled water. For example, rainwater is distilled water. And a deer can live on rainwater its entire life, and it's not going to die. So if you think that you're going to die drinking distilled water, like premature death from distilled, then that's like saying if you drink rainwater your whole life, you're going to die. But anyway, so it's good to also bring in restructured water. But what you do is you take distilled, you throw in a quartz crystal even, or add, this is where homeopathy comes into it, or just put a dab of, whatever superfood, like just a little bit of greens powder, like a tiny bit, or some baking soda, some all natural baking soda, and you put that into your restructured water with some quartz crystals, and then now that's like supercharged water, and it has alkaline elements. It has you can add electrolytes to it, and so you can supplement your diet with that. So you use distilled for cleansing, and then replenish with restructured water. So I would say both, including spring water, mineral water, because it's more alkaline. So like that's the replenish, and then the detox is the distilled. So my point is, if you still want to still eat your steak every night, that's okay. At least you have to drink water anyway, and you have to bathe anyway. So you might as well just get the shower filter. You got to brush your teeth anyway, no matter what your diet is. So get the all natural toothpaste, get the shower filter, drink distilled, drink some restructured water, make your own, or buy mineral water or a really good spring water. Drink both distilled and spring, and you'll probably notice a huge difference just by addressing the 50% water component. So that's an easy thing. Yeah, and we can't go very long without water. Humans need a lot of water. It has to do with the acid versus alkaline. Like grains are still very acidic, not as bad as meat and dairy. It's like you got your meat, and that's like that's very acidic. If I remember correctly from Dr. David Jutt's work, that's like 500 parts calcium to 100 parts phosphate. That's meat. Dairy is like 50 to 1, and then grain is like 20 to 1. And basically, in nature, we're supposed to, like broccoli, for example, and basically all the plant-based foods, it has the correct ratio of calcium phosphate, which is supposed to be like a 2 to 5 ratio, or sorry, a 5 to 2. I always confuse it. 5 parts calcium, 2 parts phosphate. So the point about meat and dairy, and this is why I look at it just purely from a scientific point of view. I don't get into ethics of veganism. But what it is it has to do with how acidic do you want to be, which lowers your megahertz level. So meat, it's like it's okay if for you to eat meat on Christmas Eve with your family, like once a year, that will have like virtually no effect on you. But if you're eating meat every day, that 500 calcium to 200 parts phosphate ratio, which is way out of whack from the 5 to 2 ratio we're supposed to have, and that's per cubic inch. That over time, imagine a lifetime where you're eating meat 3 times a day, 3 meals a day, meat at every serving, dairy at every serving, and also grain. No wonder people become so acidic by the time they're 40, 50 years old. That's why people have cancer by the time they're 50, because their megahertz has dropped to 30 megahertz because their food has made them acidic. It's laced with heavy metals, and that the heavy metals means that like you can't absorb biophotonic energy as much from food. So, for example, if without doing heavy metal cleansing with like a zeolite, even if you take monoatomics, you're not really going to be able to absorb it. That's why if you down a bottle of colloidal gold, you're not. You might feel like a little bit of upliftment, like a raise in your frequency, but you're not going to like instantly ascend. Is because you're not absorbing enough to ascend. If you actually could absorb like even like a colloidal gold in like 1 liter or 2 liters of it, if you could absorb it 100%, I mean, that would be like the alchemical masterwork, where you literally, the Philosopher's Stone, where you would literally become an ascended being, like what's depicted in the movie Lucy with Scarlett Johansson. They of course, because it's an Illuminati movie, of course, they put a negative spin on it. She takes this super drug, but they're making fun of monoatomics. She takes this blue super drug, which makes her starting to she experiences all the ascension symptoms. She experiences, full telepathy, astral projection, all those fourth density abilities, but then she starts to spontaneously combust. She actually there's a scene where she's vibrating so much, her molecules are vibrating at such high frequency, her arm starts disintegrating, and she's like, oh my God, I'm disintegrating, and she has to reground herself and literally pull herself back into third because she's already starting to shed her physical body in the movie, and it's from the drug, but really it's like someone taking a monoatomic substance that embedded within that substance, it like somehow miraculously detoxes you from all the heavy metals, then you absorb all the monoatomics instantly, and you falsely ascend, which some of the Anunnaki did. They falsely ascended, and they got stuck in between in this like weird limbo, which is a whole other topic. I recognize that there's definitely the source field, like the spark of life that animates us all, and I do believe that, or no, sorry, see, I don't like English the way words, or like the way we form sentences, because you don't choose your words very carefully, people misunderstand you very easily. English is the worst language, or the best language to be misunderstood. Worst language to describe things, because we have like different meanings for different words. But anyway, what I mean by what I believe is, what I know from my experience, is it really has to do with megahertz level. So I guess if there was a being, whatever being has the highest megahertz level in the observable universe would be, in my opinion, a god-like being. I'm not saying that is the god, the creator, but to me, whoever has the highest megahertz level or key level, that is essentially a god. Davis, in terms of just being at the top of the pyramid, a god. But I don't believe in the, like the whole, like God created the heaven and the earth type entity. No. Teach Japanese children how to navigate the other side. They don't censor their children the way we do in the West. They actually try to help them. And what they're trying to teach them is, if you raise your megahertz level, this is what I meant about having a surplus of energy, so you can actually astral project yourself out of the Saturn moon matrix, and you can actually navigate the other side, and you remember who you are, and you can maintain your cohesion, the hologram of who you are. You can actually maintain that, because we are like droplets in an ocean. The source is like the ocean, and our personality or ego or individual sense of self is the droplet, and in order to maintain that, that's our aura. And if you haven't accumulated enough energy in your lifetime, consider your body basically, like they say, like a body's like a temple. The true God is your soul, and you have to, but your soul needs to eat. You need to feed your energy body with things like monoatomics in your lifetime, and that's the organic ascension plan. So that's why Goku in Dragon Ball Z, because he is on the ascension path, and is slowly ascending, and he becomes stronger and stronger and stronger through his training. That's why when he dies and goes to Otherworld, he gets to not only keep his physical body, and they even show at the way station, the check-in station, King Yemen, he's supposed to be like he's literally a horned guy. He's wearing horns. He's supposed to kind of be, in an innocent Japanese perspective, he's supposed to kind of be like what we think of as the devil, because he decides if you're going down, up, or back to earth. And it literally shows this, right before Snake Way, it shows everybody as little clouds, and they're going in to see King Yemen, and they're still chattering in their earth voices, like, oh, where are we? Like, oh, like, we're, what's happening? And so and they have little halos around the cloud, so those are souls going to the check-in station, and this is actually what people have talked about in near-death experiences, where you have this life review. So if you give into the life review, or if you go into the white light, sometimes both happens, basically there's some kind of illusion that basically tricks you into giving your power away. That's the point, to recycle your soul. So in Dragon Ball Z, it shows Earth humans, and Earth humans in Dragon Ball Z, they have a key level of 5. Goku, even the first time he dies, I think his key level is like 1350. Eventually he reaches like millions and millions of, levels of energy, or megahertz levels. But even at that point, so his megahertz level when he dies in season 1, in like the first couple episodes, his at like 1350 megahertz. And that's why he is still intact. He is Goku. He has a halo, but he still has his physical body. And not only that, he, instead of being recycled immediately, he gets to say, wait a second, I want to keep my body. I don't want to reincarnate. And can I go train with an ascended master, King Kai? So he gets to train with the Ascended Masters because his light body's intact, and he can access the higher realms and can train with an Ascended Master instead of just immediately getting recycled. So yeah, there's a lot in Dragon Ball Z where it's encoded. Yeah. that's in Trimmel Z at the check-in station, King Yemen, with being the horn god. It's either Enlil or Marduk. Both were kind of depicted as horn gods. But like we were talking about before, because the Anunnaki, they lease the solar system to various members of their family. So Marduk gets to be in control for a while, then it passes to Ninmah, then it passes to Enki, and these are the different epochs within history. So we'll have a different Anunnaki lord being like, the manager of the solar system or the steward of the solar system. And apparently right now there's a changeover happening this century. And it was the mark, like the whole Mayan 2012 thing. What that meant was it was like a window of time. Like 2012 marked the window of time between 2012 and 2020 where this changeover was going to happen, where it was going to basically pass from Marduk to, apparently, some people say it's Ninmah. It could be passing to Ninmah, but basically another Anunnaki is stepping in. So that's why we are going to see subtle changes, because every time they come in, they keep a lot the same. I mean, they keep the status quo the same. The number one rule is you don't disturb the beast on the farm. But they also, because they're individuals and they have their own personalities, you'll see different epochs have different subtle changes. Like if you look at like the high pharaonic time of ancient Egypt, or ancient Greece or ancient China at their height, or the Mayans at the height of their civilization, those were like different Anunnakis that were in control of those, those races and those cultures. And right now the West is controlled primarily by the servants of Marduk. But there apparently are changeovers happening where it could be a new Anunnaki coming in that's going to take over. Morning Sky said, and he put it beautifully, and I'm going to say it again because it's something that's always stuck with me. He said that when you're in the tunnel and you see the white light, turn around. And if you turn around and you don't like what you see when you turn around, now apparently the universe is out there. That's, if you turn around, you have access to the universe, so you're able to escape the Saturn moon matrix. But for the sake of what I'm saying, turn around. And if for whatever reason you don't like what you see when you turn around, if it's truly the white light and it's truly benevolent, it'll still be waiting for you. So why not just, at the very least, even if you're a Christian or whatever, just turn around. And if it's really love and light and all forgiving, it will still be waiting for you. And another kind of Hopi saying is they said that when you die, you could be greeted by two different beings. One will be talking nonstop and will say, I'm going to share with you the secrets of the universe. I'll answer all your questions. I'll give you that life review, all that stuff. The other being is just going to look at you with love and light, but it's not going to say anything. And the test is you're supposed to go with the one that doesn't say anything. And there's a reason for that, which I don't want to say yet. It's something that you kind of need to know, something you need to figure out on your own. But basically, if you really think about that, two beings, one has all the answers, trying to answer every question you have, explain the secrets of the universe. The other being is just looking at you with love and light, compassion, doesn't say a word. So because it doesn't have an ego, right, or an agenda. That's your higher self. Yeah, you got it. Because there's this huge starseed community, which is great. I mean, I'm a starseed, you're a starseed. But something that, because we know the New Age movement, which the starseed community is kind of, fused with that. The New Age movement is a psyop, very much so. So what they've done is they've gotten people to identify with their starseed origin. So much so that they don't honor the sacred primate DNA anymore. They actually look down on the fact that you're basically a monkey, 98% ape. Now, what in ancient China, they have the legend of the Monkey King, and in Dragon Ball Z, Goku, the Saiyans, but they have their tails and they transform into the Great Ape. It's a retelling of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, and what the Sun Wukong is based on Homo erectus. Homo erectus being on the organic ascension timeline before the ETs really started to mess with us and gave us the missing link, which was a part of their DNA to create genetically modified humans, which is what we are now. But before that, if we had been left alone, the sacred ape would have, Homo erectus would have become Homo luminous. Because it was already a third density being. So what they've done in the starseed community, those of us who are not a Homo erectus soul, who will actually come from Andromeda, Pleiades, Sirius, doesn't really matter where, we all come from different places as starseeds, but if you're an ET soul that's incarnated for whatever reason into the sacred 8 primate body, you have to honor the fact that you, the monkey primate DNA is one of the strongest genetics and most adaptable and versatile genetics in the whole universe. That's why they experiment on us so much, because human genetics reaches out towards whatever you splice with human genetics. This is why someone can have like a pig valve in their heart. Human DNA is so adaptable, and that's the monkey DNA. We grab onto DNA and integrate it. And so that's why they're able to genetically modify us so easily anyway. But we're extremely powerful, extremely robust genetics. I mean, if you look at a gray, physically, it's not a very strong being. It's not a muscular being. It's a very thin, spindly being. Now, it has a lot of high tech, and it has psionic abilities, mental abilities. But what I'm talking about is you put Homo erectus, let's just use, you put Homo erectus in a fist fight, or even a regular human, like, I don't know, a mother or a father defending their child from a little gray alien, and guess who's going to win in a fist fight? I'm not talking about psionics or tech, just a fist fight. The ape has the strongest survival dynamics. We can channel an intense amount of energy, for one thing. We have a very high energy potential, just like the Saiyans in Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super, the new series that came out. They reach a megahertz level where they become Super Saiyan gods. They reach blue status where they become, they get this blue aura and they become Super Saiyan gods. And so we have this intense ability to, we're physically strong, and then we can channel like a tremendous amount of energy. So and we're 98% ape. So the 22 genetic programs are embedded within the 2% of the missing link. Yeah, the missing link DNA, which created Homo sapien. So what's happened in the starseed community is if someone does, higher self-channeling or hypnosis or something, or has a telepathic communication, and they realize, oh, I'm an Andromedan soul. What happens is oftentimes, not all the time, but I've encountered this a lot, where someone will say, I'm a Pleiadian, or they'll even say, I'm a Pleiadian hybrid. Now, hybrid means 50-50. And I'm sorry, you're not 50% Pleiadian. You're 98% ape. What's happening is you're identifying with your soul being a Pleiadian soul, but you have to honor the fact that you are 98% ape. So what I'm trying to say is it's kind of like, if in terms of stacking the odds in your favor, and truly learning how to maximize this machine, which is the Sacred Ape template, it's kind of like if you get a brand new sports car, if you want to understand how to drive the car to its best potential, you have to understand how the car works. So you have to know the make, the model, the engine size, and is it a V12? Is it a V6? What's the horsepower? It does have a turbo? All the stuff that would make a really good driver in a car. If you use that analogy, once you understand the legend of the Monkey King and the sacred ape DNA and how to maximize your sacred primate DNA, then instead of just being someone who jumps behind the wheel of a supercar and just puts the gas down and doesn't actually understand what the car's made of and how it actually really works, you're not going to get the best drive. Whereas if you actually understand the vehicle you're driving, then you're going to get the best drive. So, our bodies are vehicles for our consciousness to experience. So our consciousness. So if you're an Andromedan or Pleiadian soul, that's the driver. But the car that you're driving is the sacred ape. It's the monkey. We're all the Monkey King or the Monkey Queen. So you have to be aware of that and honor that, and especially in the West. See, in the East, their zodiac, they have the year of the monkey. So the monkey is still, and the legend of the Monkey King is venerated. The monkey still has like power and magic. It's an honorable animal still. It's interesting in the West how they reprogrammed us so that the monkey is looked down upon. It's like, oh, you dirty, stinking ape, or monkeys. Sometimes that's used as like a racist term to call someone a monkey, especially a white person calling someone of, a different ethnicity, saying, oh yeah, you're just a monkey. that's programming. That's social engineering to so that we don't want to be a dirty, stinking ape in the West. You don't want to identify with a monkey. That's a lowly creature. It's interesting. That's a Western perspective, and it has to do with the programming. Where for me, because I understand the legend of the Monkey King, and I growing up watching Dragon Ball Z, to this day, it was like the most spiritual show I'd ever watched, because it not only taught me the organic ascension path, but it had this encoded within it. The Legend of the Monkey King, a retelling of it. So to me, a monkey is the most sacred animal on the planet, and that's us. It's just interesting how they've reprogrammed us in the West so that it's seen as like a dirty, stinking ape, basically. To also mention, like it's still good to know your starseed origins. Like it's good to know your history as a soul. Like if you are a Pleiadian soul, a starseed, it's good to know that's where, on a consciousness level, that was your last incarnation, let's say. So in your higher self, and also your energy body, when you're actually in your energy body, you could be that being still. You could be, because that could actually be a future timeline you, where you are a fifth density Andromedan, for example. So all I'm saying is, just don't identify. You have to bring both into balance. So don't identify too much with the starseed, but also don't identify too much with the mask, the vehicle. Just understand both and bring them into balance. So what I mean by honoring the Monkey King is this is where it gets into the whole organic ascension timeline. You have to respect the fact that you are in a third density vessel that's striving towards fourth. So in order to maximize your energy potential, you have to honor your sacred ape DNA. And I just think that sometimes in the starseed community, people totally ignore that 98%, and they only identify with being who they are on a soul level. And I understand the soul is the first part of you and the body is the second part, but we are still flesh and bone, at least part of the time when we're awake. So you have to honor that and just bring both into balance. So I just saw that in the starseed, especially the New Age community. It was totally out of whack. People were only identifying with, I'm a Pleiadian soul, and it was like they didn't they didn't understand the sacred ape component. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think that the advanced stuff has the capability, like with cloaking technology, holographic technology, to either completely be invisible or look like the older stuff. Because we know they have holographic technology, so they can make TR3s look like planes if they want to. So at least now, with the U.S. Space Force, if that gets implemented, it'll be like his technicians that go out there. If that's what they're told is out there, then it's like then that's what they're like. They'll believe it. They'll see like a black triangle flying, over the surface of Mars, and they'll be like, oh, U.S. Space Force. Now that black TR3 might actually be one of the IC secrets that they haven't been briefed on. They're just going to assume everything they see, U.S. Space Force, oops, shouldn't have seen that. I'm going to look the other way. I don't want to get in trouble because I'm spying on the U.S. Technically, that's treason. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's plausible deniability, even among the technicians that are actually going to be sent out there. Now they have their own embedded deniability where they'll just be like, okay, yeah, that's the U.S. Space Force. It's ours. At least they don't they're not going to wonder anymore, is that alien? Did I just see a UFO? It'd be like, it'll be more like, oh shit, I shouldn't have seen that. That's the U.S. Using conventional rocketry, then basically it's just doing what NASA has already done. So that's why he's going to be allowed to do it. It's not like he built his own electrogravitic TR3 and is launching a public sector secret space program. One of the reasons why he's going to be allowed to do it eventually, once they get the U.S. Space Force up there to be a smokescreen, is he's using Tinker toys. So he's really no big threat. They can sabotage him. They can manipulate what he sees. They can steer his craft, if necessary, away from certain things. So it'll be a very much controlled little social experiment. But another thing about the U.S. Space Force I wanted to get out there was, I think they're also going to use this not only to as a smokescreen for the existing infrastructure out there, but then also they want to crack down this century on experiencers, because they're going to be like like the OPP here in Canada or Ontario, or the state troopers, where basically if an experiencer says, like yourself, you're photographing the TR3 over your house, if you were to actually go to the government and say, like, I'd like to report one of your craft flying over the house, or a U.S. secret military craft, because they're the new mainstream authority, the U.S. Space Force will be this new mainstream authority that the mass majority are going to believe no matter what, because they're the authority in outer space in the sense that they are physically out there with their eyes and ears. If they just say, no, they're just like, no, nothing, that wasn't ours. There's nothing. In fact, there was nothing in that airspace last night. So they'll just, you know what I mean? They'll just use, they'll crack down on experiencers, because even if they know for a fact that there was a TR3 flying over your house at night, what they're going to start saying is, no, like, nothing showed up on our radar. We had craft patrolling that area, but we didn't, our flight plan went nowhere near the house that you specified. You know what I mean? They're just going to deny it, but they're going to deny it in a way where, 90% of people, if you are an experiencer and you're saying, I saw a TR3 or some kind of UFO at this location at a certain time, and you actually check in with the U.S. Space Force, they'll just say, because they're the new eyes and ears and authority actually, patrolling our airspace, they'll just deny it. Just be like, no, there's nothing out there. We didn't see anything. If we saw something, we would have reported it. As we know, that's what the Air Force was told for a long time. And I think they're gonna, not that the Air Force, they conducted their own little investigation. They figured out there's other programs running out there. But that old idea of saying it's all UFOs are man-made, they're just secret prototype craft, that's also going to be the new sell that the U.S. Space Force is going to say. So that anytime anyone reports a UFO and actually gets some hard evidence, they'll just say, well, yeah, that's one of our prototypes. By the way, you really shouldn't have that footage, so we're going to confiscate it. That's private property. I do think they're going to they're going to try to use their new authority because people are going to believe them, because they're going to disclose the fact that they're physically up there and they're basically watching over us. They're doing what Solar Warden has been doing in the background, which is like air traffic control for the planet. They're like the Coast Guard of the solar system. So now with this U.S. Space Force, anytime you try to report anything that is not a part of their agenda, they can deny it. And who are the mainstream people going to believe? The U.S., this new branch of the military that's all official, or someone with a blurry cell phone picture, right? Even if that thing was really there, if the U.S. Space Force denies it, then at least 90% of people are going to be like, yeah, that guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So it's just something to look out for, definitely. We haven't been alone since we were Homo erectus. So if you're worried about ETs invading, they've been here for a very long time. So they've already been here. They are here, and that's why our society is the way it is. Yes, I've encountered that type of being, the human-looking ET that is, it was physical. It spoke with its mouth, but the way it carried itself, kind of like slinked around, like it was uncomfortable in our current atmosphere and pressure and all that, and the way it looked at me and could read my mind and also scan my memories and know the names of my grandfathers and what video game I played as a kid, and really personal stuff that I had never put on the internet. And that was in 2009, so Facebook was kind of just taking off, and back then you didn't really put that much personal information on the internet. So even if some reason this person had tracked me down on the internet, there's too many details for it to know. So it was literally doing the entrainment. It was pulling stuff out of my mind, reading me, scanning me. And but it looked very, very human. But what's interesting, just energetically being sensitive to energy, you could tell it didn't belong. It clearly, even though it looked human, and this is really important because there are human-looking ones that walk around, you can tell instantly if you're sensitive that it doesn't belong. It's a strange sensation when you look at someone, because even if you walk down the street and you may not like someone for whatever reason, you make a snap judgment. At least you know they're human and that they're human, right? You may not like them, but they're human. It's different when something walks up to you and it looks human, but it's like a physical response where your body animal realizes that that thing is not native to our ecosystem. It might look human, but it's not it didn't evolve on Earth. So there's a flight or fight response, which is very powerful. The body reacts before you do. Before you even, the intelligence of the body, before you even know what you're looking at, the body's already kind of like literally recoiling. That's how you can kind of tell. Well, I said it looked really cold because it was like white, like the whitest white I've ever seen, like almost like it was painted white. That's how white it was. And I said, you look really cold. And then it touched me on the hand, and it said, like right here, it touched me just like that, just like, boop, just touched me on the hand and said, you're colder than I am. And then it gave me a shock and sent a shiver down my spine. Well, I knew it wasn't human. Just like empathically, I could tell this thing was an extraterrestrial, humanoid-looking extraterrestrial. But there's my point is though that it physically touched me. So that's how I know. I mean, there's also witnesses. I asked to make sure I didn't imagine the thing, and people saw me with this person. But it did actually touch me, and that's how I know it was real as well. It looked, it did look like a dead person. It looked very much like a corpse because it could have just been that because it's an ET and it's in space or underground most of the time. It was just that pale because it didn't get a lot of sunlight. But it looked like a dead person, or I guess like a vampire because of how white it was. And there was some ruddiness kind of around the eyes a little bit. I noticed it was kind of creepy. It was like the skin around the eyes was a little like ruddy, if you know what I mean. It kind of had like some little broken blood vessels kind of a little bit around the eyes. I mean, it could, I don't know for sure, but it could have been, an animated corpse, a fresh corpse that was animated. But it definitely gave me, let's put it this, my body, the intelligence of the body, even though it moved slowly and talked in a very monotone tone, and it was actually a very short being. I was a foot taller than it, so it wasn't like a big intimidating being. This little man, I mean, I was like 21 at the time, so it looked about 30. So this like little man, its presence. I've never been more afraid of anything in my life, and this is a little 5'6", 5'7", shorter man, all pale, very sallow, very monotone, big eyes, staring like through me, reading my mind, and just you know what I mean. So it wasn't physically intimidating, but energetically, it was so nasty that for some reason my body was freaking out. So yeah, it was either an ET or maybe it was a corpse, and because I'm alive, it was picking up on the fact that you're face to face with a dead body that's talking to you. Like, that's not natural. So it could have been that response, but there's definitely a physical response I couldn't control. I was shaking like a leaf because I was that uncomfortable being around it. When I did my higher self channeling with Carl, I asked, what was this being in North Bay? And what my higher self said through Carl was that it was an ET. It was an ET hybrid, and that but it was a field check because I was spontaneously remembering things. And you got to think, this is March 2009. I was picked up and put back in November 2008. So from November to March that winter, I was getting all the flashbacks and I was remembering everything after being blank slated. So when I went up to North Bay to visit my friend, I was 5.5 hours away from all my other friends and family, mainly my family, right? So I was like away from that protective energy of my family. And it was a field check because it wanted to do the entrainment physically. And like you said, have a two-way conversation and see how much I was actually remembering. Because back then, can you imagine, I wasn't quite there yet, but imagine if in 2009, I went public and was starting to talk about, being blank slated in the secret space program and the white TR3. Now, it did the entrainment, but unfortunately, because of how scary and traumatic, I mean, I was already having night terrors, and I knew it was linked to my TR3 setting. But there's one thing about seeing a UFO and worrying you might have been abducted and having some bad dreams. It's another thing when you actually have like a face-to-face contact experience with an ET, and this was a nasty one. And at that point, there's no more doubt in my mind. I knew these things were real, and I had actually talked to it, and it had touched me. So basically, I kind of had a nervous breakdown in 2009, and it took me basically till 2017 for me to feel that confident and strong and grounded to even have the courage to publicly talk about this. So it definitely, not only did it do this field check where it interrogated me and kind of checked in with me, it definitely, just because of how physically it scared me, it traumatized me to the point where I developed such bad PTSD after that experience. And then after the TR3 and the abduction, I was like PTSD on top of PTSD. What I'm trying to say is it really slowed down my own personal evolution in terms of waking up to this and also just having the confidence to talk about it openly. Right, June 2017. Yeah. Yeah, we know each other. So what happened there was a week after going public, we got in contact on Facebook and said we should probably have a conversation. And I agreed. And then the night before, really hours before, because of my reverse sleep cycle, those remote influencers showed up. And they basically, I remember bits and pieces, but it was an interrogation. Same thing that happened in North Bay, except this time they used remote influencers. I mean, I'd already gone public. I went over my timeline, and the damage was already kind of done at that point. But I think what they were trying to do was, because I had these other memories of you, which I didn't want to talk about in my first interview because I hadn't gotten in contact with you yet, and that was what our first conversation was about, was us getting to know each other and me telling you my experiences on Mars and seeing if that resonated with you. And I didn't want to just on my first video start talking about you, and you have no idea who I am, right? So I withheld that, and then sure enough, a week after going public, where we set up that first Skype meeting, and then these remote influencers did the exact same thing energetically using remote influencing that the MIB did, which was basically do this kind of interrogation, and also to just to scare me, because I got rattled. And interestingly enough, there's another gentleman, I'm not going to mention his name, but he was a guy in Australia that he was going to have a conversation with you one time. And he had the same experience, and he told me that he had the same experience the night before and decided not to get in contact with you because he had a family, and he just thought, no, this is getting too weird. This is weird that I basically had these people invade my dream space last night, asking me about Ileana hours before I'm supposed to talk to her on Skype. And him being a dad, he's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to risk it. Me, I'm single, I don't have kids, so I figured, the worst thing that can happen is they're just going to, do something to me. So I accepted the risk. It was worth it. It was very, spontaneous. I know it was like we were both online, and I guess maybe I jumped the gun, but we were both definitely we had the same wavelength that night. I think it's because, we were connected in the program, and we had that memory, and that's the thing. I had flashbacks about you years before you went public, and I actually didn't come across you until May of 2017. That's when I discovered Denny's channel. I watched his interview with Tony first, and then the suggested links and that. Then I watched yours, and I went, oh my God, that's the swimming instructor, or the girl that in the pool, standing on the edge of the pool, teaching us all that stuff. And I had those dreams for like years prior. And then sure enough, after a week after I did my first interview, I didn't mention you, didn't even mention to Denny that I had recalls of you, and then we ended up almost typing to each other at the exact same time. Yeah, Rochelle's interesting. What I find interesting about her is, even though I don't have an actual recall of Rochelle specifically, I think we were in a different program at a different time. We were taken to the same place, the Golden Spa that Will talks about. And same with Will, same thing. Like I don't have a direct recall of him, but I've also been taken to the same facility that he describes, which he called the Golden Spa. And so it's just very synchronistic. And what's synchronous about that too is Rochelle being from Australia. This is what I mean about this British Commonwealth and how it extends to all the nations that the UK still very much controls. And so the British Empire is still very much at play. The US is definitely the main superpower, followed by like Russia and China. But the British Commonwealth is one of their main allies of the US. They work very, very closely with the UK. But the UK still kind of also has their own little agenda, secret programs running. That's the thing. That's what we're discovering with everyone's recalls is there's so many different programs out there and so many different groups like ICC, Solar Warden, Fourth Reich. I mean, there's over 30 factions. So it's really important that when someone is recalling a certain program that we're supportive, and just understand that if someone's describing similar yet different, that's actually probably more likely than only describing one program, and then someone saying like, oh, well, like that's not what I experienced, so therefore, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, well, actually, there's about probably 30 different programs. And the Queen's on our money, so it doesn't get more obvious than that. And we have the Governor General that the Queen appoints, and she basically is the representative of the Queen that our Prime Minister works very closely with, and that's not an elected position, it's appointed. And so we have the Governor General appointed basically by the Queen of England, and even our judges, we call it the Crown. We don't call it a judge. When you go before even traffic court, I went to traffic court once, and they said there's the Crown, and there's the British coat of arms behind the Crown. And it's basically you violated some laws under the Highway Traffic Act, basically the King's Highway, the Queen's Highway. You violated a certain law on the Queen's Highway, so here's the representative of the Queen, known as the Crown. And basically it's you versus the Queen of England, and here's the proxy, the Crown, the judge. So yeah, and we have a parliamentary system here. So our in terms of our voting, it's like the British parliamentary system. It's different than the republic system the United States has. So yeah, we're definitely a British country. I mean, all our street names are named after British royals, and yeah, all the rest of it. So I just want to say, but since we're on the topic of the Native Americans, it's just interesting because, again, in Terra Papers, Robert Morningsky talks about the Aku. The Aku, that's where like the word acoustic kind of comes from. Like it has to do with the bird, the avian races that were in contact with the Native Americans. So apparently, the Native Americans, the reason why they adorn themselves in feathers is because they're trying to honor the Aku and emulate the Aku. So my point is, the Aku are like these fifth density bird-like race that were in contact with many of the Native Americans, and they were a benevolent, higher density race that was trying to get them back on the organic ascension timeline after the missing link fiasco. So Native American culture, if they had been left alone by the Europeans, they were ascending into fourth thanks to the Aku. And it's just interesting that those were the real angels. So the Jesuits come over, and so basically you got the Jesuits, the Christian, which is actually like a very Luciferian, and so you have basically the Luciferians come over and kill the contactees who are actually in contact with the real angels. Ironically enough. And then in their false light religion, they worship saints and angels, which are these archetypes. And they have nothing, they're actually archetypes that exist in negative space, and they have nothing to do with the Aku, which are the Native Americans were actually really in contact with. And if you look at the differences in European society and Native American society, you can see that obviously one society is Luciferian, run by regressive ETs. The other is being mentored by higher density, fifth density, avian, Aku, angel, angelic type beings, and look at the difference in culture. So I just think it's very ironic that the universe is not without irony, that the Luciferians that claim to, worship Jesus and the angels are actually killing the people who are in contact with the real life angels. I just think that's, again, that's just like the hidden history of planet Earth. Everything is like tipped upside down, Alice in Wonderland, up is down, down is up, and it just blows my mind to this day that, you know what I mean? Like the Christians come over and and they have like the angels in their religion, and yet they're really a part of Ra's legion. That's their Ra legion. Their religion is they're worshiping Ra Marduk, who's Lucifer, and exterminating those who are actually in contact with the angels, the higher density angelic beings. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. Okay, it's kind of a copy of what Morning Sky warned us about. Again, back in the 90s, especially in the early 2000s, the Ashtar Command was very popular, and the whole Ashtar Command thing was this notion that at any point they're going to come here and save us. They have like hundreds of cloaked ships in our solar system just waiting to basically take us off planet and save us. And Morning Sky warned that if you actually got on, if you got on board one of these Ashtar ships, that at that point they could do anything they want with you, and they're not who they say they are. So basically, you're giving up your free will, and you'll probably never be heard from again. And it's just interesting that now they've revamped it. This is why the New Age is very much a psyop. They revamped it so that now, instead of it being the Ashtar command that's going to take you on a UFO and take you to some paradise planet, now it's the inner Earth. So don't tell anyone where you're going. The protocol is you're not allowed to tell any loved ones or friends that you're in contact with an Agartha being. And then it's going to take you underground, and it's going to take you to this like paradise underground, this sanctuary, and you get to live in inner Earth, but you're not allowed to tell anyone where you're going. And that's extremely unsafe. Just like getting on a UFO with the bearers of false gifts, that like the Ashtar Command was saying or offering to people, like in the early 2000s. So it's the same thing. I just think it's so much like the Ashtar Command, and it's the Agartha inner Earth thing. And okay, this is where we start naming names. I want to be careful here. There's a certain inner Earth. I'll just put it in kind of vague terms. Okay, people who already know this will know what I'm talking about. There's a certain inner Earth group, because there's many different inner Earth groups. There's a certain one that makes telepathic contact with you, but they actually they're doing the entrainment from deep underground, and what they do is they're actually vampiring energy from you. They're vampires, so they people will channel these beings, and they will say that they're in contact with this being, and they'll start getting information. And yes, there is an exchange on an intellectual level of information. That's the carrot. But what's really happening is that this being is actually leeching energy from you. They're energetic vampires. And apparently in person, they're even more than that. Apparently they even drink blood and things like that. So they're very much exactly what you think of as a vampire. But there's the psychic component where they're able to, basically pull in someone who is a psychic and start kind of like leading them astray, and actually starting to suck their energy, because that person, psychic, probably it's starting to raise their megahertz, and then they show up on the radar, and these inner Earth beings say like, oh, there's a good one that's starting to wake up and starting to vibrate at a higher frequency, tapping into the higher realms. Will make telepathic contact, and then we'll start actually vampiring energy from this person. And then it starts out usually with good information, but then there's the disinformation, and then the story. You go, like we're talking about, if you actually were to disappear into the inner Earth and you follow the protocol where you're not supposed to tell anyone where you're going, then yeah, you will become one of these missing people that like goes to a national park and is never seen from or heard from again, and they don't even find your clothes or like a single footprint. You're just gone. And it's possible that you were actually food. I mean, you start out as psychic food, like energetic food, but then eventually you might actually really become like food. They might actually drink your blood in some weird ritual. So yeah, it's just, people should be careful. And, I think just, again, like, honor the whole legend of the Monkey King. Like focus on building up your megahertz level, like taking monoatomics and meditating and exercising and finding your passion in life, whatever gives you energy, and reaching out with your mind, trying to make contact with inner Earth beings. It's dangerous. It's the analogy is, if you heard like, this is the thing about like telepathic contact. It's like this: if you heard a knock at your door at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, would you answer it? Probably not. And if you did, you'd be very suspicious of the person standing outside who says, hey, I have a present for you. And you're like, I don't know who you are. Like, you wouldn't invite them in your house. Well, what's the difference at 3 in the morning when you're meditating, making telepathic contact, and this voice comes in and says like, oh, I want to teach you this, the secrets of the universe. Let me teach you this bit of information. It's the same as some stranger at 3 in the morning saying, I have a present for you. Let me in, little pig. You know what I mean? So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Vampire thing where like, yeah, it can only come in unless it's invited, but in the real life, in terms of your free will, a telepathic communication is all it needs to gain permission to actually enter your space, and even just start to influence your thoughts and feelings telepathically. And yeah, you might become possessed eventually. I think no, it's dangerous. I think if it's meant to be, it'll happen in a really benevolent way where you actually don't have to initiate the contact. Really, in terms of your soul family, like if you are an Andromedan soul, you should really look at like the Alex Collar information, where they checked in with him throughout his lifetime in a very benevolent way, and he basically would have dreams, and they were very benevolent, and it was just them like catching up like old friends, just having a conversation, giving him some insights. Yeah, he got a little bit of a tour of the ship and all that, but it was very benevolent, and like he didn't have to initiate it. That's my point. And so people were wondering like, how do I make contact? Don't try to make contact, because it's going to be like knocking on the devil's door. One of these negative beings will use that as an excuse to violate your free will. If it's meant to be your soul family, your starseed family, whether from Andromeda, Pleiades, anywhere, they will contact you, usually in the form of a dream, or at least it'll start with dreams, and then and it'll happen on its own. They'll make their presence known if it's benevolent on its own. It's not something you don't have to get their attention, because they're already watching over you. And there's a plan where they will contact you when you're ready. When your higher self knows that your current self is ready to remember your star family. Yeah, I've never. It's not something I'm willing to do myself. I respect people who are able to do it properly, but you're right. It takes a lot of protection. It's a huge risk. It's something that I'm not willing to do myself because I have witnessed some people in my life, some friends who are channelers, and what happened a couple times is they started channeling the being, and then pretty soon, or after a while, eventually, then all of a sudden they thought they were the being, and they would become possessed. And there's this subtle changeover that sometimes happens with channelers, where they're channeling like the Archangel Michael, and then next thing you know, they're saying they're the Archangel Michael. And it's like, whoa, so that's a subtle hint that they're actually becoming possessed, because the actual consciousness, their real consciousness, is being pushed into the back of the mind, and this thing is grabbing onto that person's ego and running amok. So yeah, it's dangerous. I wouldn't recommend it. I would just focus on the organic ascension path, and keep a dream journal, and your star family will contact you when you're ready. That's why I don't like it, because I'm trying to stay in body as much as possible to stay as present as possible, and I'm not comfortable with giving up my space and having something impinge into, like we talked about, the bioplasmatic hologram of who we are. I don't want this overlay of another being energetically imprinting itself into mine. Or I'm not comfortable with that. But that's just me personally. I'm just talking about me personally. But I have, like I described, I've seen channelers basically go mad, and they've become possessed through entity attachments, and it happens more often than not. And that's why I'm not willing to take the risk, because the odds are not in your favor when you do that. So